Welcome back, Terry Anker. It's
Good to be
great.
back.
It's great to see you here again at our podcast. And it's been like 4 months that we last talked.
It has been.
And you're the first person who I interviewed twice this year.
Ah,
So, what has happened ever since we did Northwood University?
well, I'll tell you that honestly, I continue to be concerned about labor.
Yeah.
And it falls into two spaces. One is that people are challenged by inflation and they're struggling to keep their personal earnings where they once were. But at the same time, they're also challenged by the notion that they believe that they can work from home or disengage. You know, we have these various sort of slogans for it, quiet quitting, or where people really have just slowed down their economic contribution to the organizations. And I think that that's being felt. You know, we're seeing increases in labor costs, not only from increasing salaries, but also from the fact that people are less productive than they once were. And so, to be honest, that's probably the thing that concerns me the most. In the public space, I would say that I'm more concerned about the fact that so many trustees and board members, both in the corporate but especially in the not-for-profit space, are just not as actively involved in managing the organizations as they once were. It's a common problem that's been written about a great deal, but the comparative value to an executive director, let's say that you work for something like the American Heart Association, your compensation is in the millions of dollars when you include benefits. And a board member that's there maybe is donating $50,000. So it creates a disparity in the way that they fight for these organizations because one has an enormous amount to lose and another does not.
Yeah.
And so things like ESG and other sorts of decisions that are externalized are often made really, I think, against what the responsibility is of the trustees as a fiduciary to those organizations. Is ESG producing a better return? Is it appropriate to hire a money manager to make ethical decisions for your corporation? Those kind of questions, I think, are often not being asked.
Well, especially on the business level, because those regulations are forced on enterprises, and they don't have a choice. They have to follow those ESG regulations. We see that in the financial industry, when all of a sudden the central banks become green and talk about green investment. And we don't know what green investment is. Can be from too. And then it's greenwashing as well.
You're so precisely correct. Happily, in the companies where I'm involved, they're generally smaller, and the interests of the board members align better with the interests of the corporation. And in most cases, the founder is still present.
Yeah.
Whereas a bigger problem, I think, is in large corporations where you have the magistrate leadership.
Anonymous.
Of course. And people are not stakeholders in the same way, and so they allow these things to happen. So the pressure from regulators is part of the play, certainly, but I think some is a willing, lemming to the cliff that we're all sort of leaping over without really taking time to think about whether this is something that we should be doing or not.
Well, can I take one step back? Because you started out with the labor market. You started with the difficulties of getting the right labor force or to getting the right people that you can hire, because there is a difference in attitude now. Maybe since COVID and since many more handouts were given, so that working is not attractive anymore, because people can live a good life without even working hard, and because they get government, which is taxpayers' money. Is this the only reason, or is it just people talk about work-life balance, that they are kind of entitled to this lot of free time?
I think that you've said many things. One that I have to push back on a bit is that people can't live a good life if they're not contributing. They can for a very short time, and then eventually they will fall behind.
Well, but Lady Thatcher put it this way: socialists run their regimes until they run out of other people's money.
That's precisely correct.
Our governments never run out of money because they keep printing.
Well, you look at it here in the United States, though, I would say that bankruptcy rates are rising very rapidly, and it's because people have made these decisions that are less productive, and they've continued to spend. And you can't live the same life unless you're contributing and continuing to grow, which is fine. When people speak to me about work-life balance, you have to make the choice that is a balanced choice. Meaning, if you prefer to work less, then you must spend less.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is people who work less tend to spend more.
Well, thank you for putting that right, because I think this is truly important. That you cannot become wealthy and rich and prosperous if you don't contribute. So thanks a lot
If
for
there's a way
clarifying
to do it, I ask your listeners to give me a call and tell me how to do it without working, because I haven't figured it out. Inheriting, maybe that was the
Yeah,
thing
well,
that I
but
missed.
even then you're responsible.
Of course.
At least you should be.
Barbara, while we were talking, another story popped into my head about this notion of the detachment of the magistrate leadership of a corporation. I was with a friend recently who is a major officer at a Fortune 100 company. She's most impressive and has done very well in her career. And we're at dinner with some other friends, and she absentmindedly checks her phone and jumps up and leaves the table. I thought that the house was on fire or something had happened. And she comes back and she says, "My CEO just signed a letter condemning the Chinese government," which is fine. People do that. I suppose that's a right that people have. However, she said, "We have 12,000 employees living and working in China." And she's like, "This is not a good thing." She called the CEO, who responded and said, "Well, I was at a cocktail party. Other people were doing it, but it was absent-minded. It wasn't something that the reason that there has been board action and Robert's Rules of Order and these standards is because it slows down those kinds of things, so that we have an opportunity to adequately reflect upon them before we commit."
Yes.
And as you know, a number of CEOs many years ago, now 2 or 3 years ago, I guess, their names were ascribed to many of these causes, and they ultimately said, "We didn't agree to that." That they had been talked to or approached, and the assumption was made. We just have to take responsibility for our organizations. Much like we're talking about workers, I think that leaders have to take responsibility as well.
As we do for our families.
Right, absolutely.
That's the same thing.
It's more fun with our families, I think.
Well, that is true.
And it is very simple.
So if we look back and if we take, I want to pick up that rookie seat issue, because we in Europe face the same problems. You don't find qualified stuff, or it's hard to get them and stay in the companies.
I'll tell you, in our newspapers, for example, we hire graphic designers and others to do ad layouts and newspaper layout. And the digital layouts are different, so we have these people working all the time, and they'll often come to us and be interviewing for a job, and they'll tell us what they imagine themselves to be worth financially.
Yeah.
Because as humans, they're worth the same as any other human, I suppose. But as a laborer, they're only worth as much as the market will bear. And they'll tell us that their university told them that they're worth this much money. And I'm like, I feel badly telling this young person this, but their university probably misled them, because they're not worth that much money. The market won't pay it. But the university needs to create that value proposition so they can convince these young people to pay enormous amounts of money for a degree that's probably not worth what they're paying.
That is true.
And it's troubling. And not all universities do this, and certainly it's kind of an mTOR. The students should be aware of this, or their friends and advisors, family. But at the same time, greater transparency on the value of these degrees is critical. I think about education, technical education in the United States, for example, welders, electricians, plumbers. These are very highly valued jobs, and they're not being filled. We have huge gaps of workers in these fields.
Yeah.
But I think some of it is because young people don't fully understand that they seek status rather than security, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, totally.
And so that we now have created this notion that all degrees are equal, and they're not. Some will guarantee you some quality of
Better
life,
job, yes.
of course, and employment, rapid employment. Others will be more difficult, especially if you're not at a top tier school. or you're not performing at the top of your class.
In other words, achievement principle matters.
You bet. And if you're a plumber and you become certified at the end of your education, then you're the same as everyone else who's certified.
Exactly.
But if you're a historian, the variability is very different. Your degree is not the same as all other degrees, even though they appear to be.
Yeah. Well, Terry, I think this was a great lesson on labor economics and how we can actually tell the next generation that they need to be hardworking, that they need to be achieving. Otherwise, they will not become a successful businessman like you are, or a successful individual.
Happily, Barbara, I think that they'll find it on their own, and we just have to remind them and give them some safe harbor when they talk about these things. Some people are intelligent, they're hardworking, they are just have often been misinformed.
That's true.
That work-life balance is balance.
Mm-hmm.
What they often think is work-life balance means I don't work as much.
Yeah.
But that's not what it means. It means you spend less, or you find different ways to spend your free time. And they haven't thought about that part because it's not been presented.
That is true. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, for taking the time. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation. And let's see what has happened then in the world.
As am I.
Thank you.